Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, The Ten. Disclaimer. I own nothing from Lord of the Rings, unfortunately. Please read and review my story. Any Elvish in here is not the real Elvish language. I don't know it, so I made up my own. There is a perfectly good appendix in the back of all the books. Please don't complain about it. Would love to get reviews. Tell me what you think. P.S. I know it's not perfect, and doesn't exactly follow the book. But with the first, I'm kind of skipping around a bit to get to the second, which will closer follow the book. Yeah, I know, it's the book forum, blah, blah, blah. I'm working on it, as best to my ability, and creative mind wants to write. I have edited and re-edited. When you review, if you don't mind, I really don't care about the punctuation and little bitty stuff like that. More about the bigger stuff, please. I know it's not exactly like the book, but I did say in my summary there would be changes. Please review. Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 1. The beginning of the end, or the beginning of the end. That's Freudian right there. The beginning of the 10. And you have my bow, Legolas said, as you have mine. All eyes turned towards the elf that had spoken. She stood tall and proud. Golden red hair fell in cascades of curls down her back, but was kept tied up. Bright green eyes looked over the men, her chin held high, a smile across her lips. She stood proud. She wore not a dress, but men's legging and shirt. The shirt obviously belonged to a boy, for though it filled nicely across her chest, it hung loose about her waist. Over the leggings she wore a short pair of breeches like most men. She wore a large, thick belt that held it in place. A sword was strapped to her side, and she held a bow in her hand. A quiver was strung across her back. In our world, this sort of attire would have been described as that a female pirate would wear. The young woman was Ravina. She and Legolas had known each other for many years, since they were very small. She knew Aragorn, too. He smiled at her and nodded slightly. Legolas, on the other hand, seemed afraid. Their love for each other was kept secret. If her father knew, they knew not what would happen to the kingdoms. Legolas didn't want Raven to go. He loved her too much. I will not allow it, a voice said from behind her. She rolled her eyes and turned towards her father. Father, please! You are but a young woman, a lady of the house. I will not allow you to befall such a dangerous thing. I can take care of myself. Haldir is allowed, but he wouldn't even come to the meeting. He is more important than I. You as the princess are just as important. I do not approve, not even if your brother had decided to go. Arguments began to break. What can our woman do? Someone yelled. Other women there began to argue back. Enough of this, Elrond yelled. Gandalf, Frodo, what say you to this? Gandalf looked down. I have known Ravina many a year. I have no doubt whatsoever that she will benefit to this journey. Frodo nodded. Let her show her quality, he said. Raven beamed. Then you have my bow, Master Frodo, as well as my sword. She bowed. She went and stood beside Aragorn, who nudged her. What? She hissed under her breath. You know, I am never going to let you get away with it. With what? You're only becoming because of Legolas. She blushed. Maybe I want the adventure. I was tired of being stuck in a room wearing dresses that flattered me. Aragorn rolled his eyes. You have my axe, a dwarf said, and joined them. A human man stood and brushed his blond hair from his face. It seems you hold the fate of soul, little one. He joined them, as did 3 other hobbits. You shall be the Fellowship of the Ring. Raven wandered about the gardens. She had put on a slim night clothes, but could not sleep. Her bare feet felt cold against the ground, but it felt good to her. Raven, a voice said. She turned quickly, pulling out her dagger from beneath her shirt. Oh. She relaxed and sheathed the small weapon. Legolas. They ran to each other and embraced. Why would you come? He asked, holding her away with him. Why would you want this? I cannot stay in the palace all my life. I want to be with you, and I want adventure. You can protect me, as will Aragorn. You know he loves me as a sister. You won't let anything happen to me. Raven, he sighed. Shh, you need rest. We have a long journey ahead of us. He nodded and turned to leave. Before you leave, she said quietly, grabbing his hand. He stopped and turned to her. Kiss me, just once. He smiled and brought his lips softly to her. They had not made love yet they were waiting for a time that was more important than the world itself, a time where the world would stand still. Until then, they would hold each other. They could wait. Legolas held her once more and then walked away. As Raven finished packing, she felt someone come in behind her. You're lucky you're coming. Elrond expects many things from you, otherwise I don't think he would have let you come. She smiled as she straightened up, not turning. And what of you, Ranger? You think Elrond doesn't expect anything of you? She turned to face Aragorn. Though you told him no, he still somewhere knows you will lead. Aragorn shook his head. Your premonition does not involve me. It is another. I turned from that path as I did the other one. He strode towards her. And you know how that broke my heart. He stroked her face. I never meant to hurt you, but it was a life that was not mine. She turned away from him. We're leaving soon. I suggest you pack Strider. Aragorn reached towards her as if to comfort her, but then he turned and left. Raven finished packing and walked out to meet the others. She quickly went to Gandalf. She must speak with him. You want to know if you will benefit to this journey, he said, his back to her. Yes, I do. I mean, it's like they say I'm a girl. What can I do? How am I going to help? Gandalf turned to her, leaning on his staff. He smiled at her, a wise look in his eyes. I have no doubt in my mind that you will do great things. You will help us more than you can know, my dear. Raven smiled. I have known you since you were but a child, and even after I thought I knew you, you surprised me yet again. He put a hand on her shoulder. You'll help. Now cheer up. Must show them a strong woman inside you. Raven lifted her chin, then hugged Gandalf. Thank you, old friend. He laughed and led her towards the awaiting fellowship. They were on their way. Raven couldn't believe she had done it. She clutched the necklace that hung about her neck. Her father had given it to her before she left. It will protect you, he said simply, placing it around her neck. Thank you, she said. Now go, her father ordered, but she looked at her with a smile in his eyes. Do great things. She smiled up after the small hobbits, making sure they wouldn't get lost. She looked behind her as Boromir, Frodo, and then Aragorn followed up behind. Boromir moved his shield that it slid up on his back. He reached up and slipped. Falling backwards, he was suddenly grabbed. He looked up and saw that Raven had a tight hold on his arm. That would have been a nasty fall, she said as she helped him up. They looked far down behind where jagged rocks threatened them. He nodded and pulled his arm away. She let him go ahead of her and watched as he went. She didn't like this man. She reached down and pulled Frodo up. You all right there? She asked. Frodo smiled wearily. Could be better, he said. Thank you. And he followed after the man. I don't like the looks of him, she said as she helped Aragorn. Neither do I, he said simply. Raven took her place in front of Boromir once more. How much further is it? She heard Frodo ask. I don't know, Aragorn said. Venna, ask Legolas how much further. Raven nodded. Legolas, she yelled, how much further? Farther than you think. We'll rest here. A fire was started, and Raven gathered the hobbits about it, while the two men and the elf put up tents. What are we having for dinner, then? One hobbit asked the other. No idea, Pip. Well, we are going to eat, aren't we? Pippin asked. Merry shrugged and warmed his hands. Don't worry, little hobbits, we'll have you well looked after, Raven said as she sat beside them. She slipped her bag from her back and reached inside. I'm sure they have something planned for supper. In the meantime, she passed around bread. Thank you, Pippin said excitedly. Raven stood and looked up at the setting sun. She walked and stood at the cliff. Legolas came up behind her. Do you think it will be this hard? I think it will be worse, he said. She turned and curled into his arms. He stroked her cheek softly and brought his lips to her. Together they watched the sunset. Raven looked out at the dark land and spoke, a prayer she remembered her mother always whispering to her. I pray the day we will be free, or land together, unity. We pray for a time of love and peace at hand, from the one who rules this land. Darkness creeping, widows weeping, how can we be saved? Come the King of golden rain, and bring us from our darkest pain. Someone save us from this land, and remove us his evil hand.